After being widowed for 20 years, I introduced my new boyfriend at the family Christmas gathering. My 3 grown children, however, tore into me in front of everyone. They said I wasn't thinking clearly, accused me of wanting to give my property to someone outside the family, and even called me shameless, claiming I was ruining the family reputation. They told me to get out, saying this house no longer welcomed me. 3 months later, one by one, they showed up at my door, luggage in hand, crying and begging to come back. But this time I only opened the door for those who truly deserved it. I looked out the kitchen window, the Christmas lights already hung along the street, casting a warm, joyful glow. I placed the last batch of gingerbread into the tin, secured the lid, and let out a deep sigh. This Christmas felt different. For the first time in 20 years, I felt like I was finally doing something for myself. Walter sat on the old sofa in the living room, wearing his round glasses, holding my nearly worn-out book in his hands, a small smile playing on his lips as he came across a particularly beautiful line. Noticing me watching him, he set the book down and raised his coffee cup toward me. "Need me to try one?" he asked gently, his voice light and teasing. I smiled and walked over, handing him a slightly imperfect gingerbread corner. He took a bite, nodding as though seriously judging a contestant's entry. "You know," he said, "it's perfect. Full of that home flavor." I sat beside him, leaning my shoulder against his. The room was silent, no background music, just the ticking of the clock on the wall and the gentle crunching sound of Walter chewing his cookie. "Are you sure you're ready?" I whispered. "Ready for tomorrow?" he asked, lowering his voice. "Yeah." He smiled and lightly covered my hand with his. "Maggie, they're your children. You don't need to apologize for finding love." I didn't respond right away. I just stared at the Christmas lights on the mantel, pausing for a few seconds in silence. I knew I shouldn't apologize, but that old, unfounded guilt still lingered. When Frank died 20 years ago, James had just graduated from college, Amy was still at community college, and Ethan hadn't even gotten his driver's license yet. I had dedicated my whole life to them. I worked during the day, cooked at night, and babysat for them during the holidays, never once considering a fresh start. Back then, I even thought widowhood was a luxury I couldn't afford. But then, that day in the library, the one near the harbor with its old wooden floors, I was flipping through books in the poetry section, and Walter was across from me. He was looking for a collection of Emily Dickinson's poems. I remember he suddenly looked up and asked seriously, "Do you think when she wrote, 'Hope is the thing with feathers,' she was comforting herself or someone else?" I looked into his eyes, and it was like I suddenly understood a language I hadn't known before. It wasn't falling in love, but understanding. That understanding was more steady, deeper, and longer-lasting than love. That year we watched 17 classic films together. 3 of them at an outdoor screening at the museum. We went to the Rose Garden in Santa Barbara, where he bought me an old wooden comb, saying it was classic and beautiful. He also joined me in revisiting flea markets, helping me rediscover the hobbies I had before motherhood: painting, gardening, opera. He said my laughter was more valuable than the treasures in the museum. Now I wanted to introduce this man to my children. I wanted to say, "You don't have to like him, but please respect him and respect my decision. Because he is the truest joy I have right now." Walter seemed to sense I had drifted back into my memories. He turned toward me. "What's worrying you now?" I shook my head. "I just don't want tomorrow to feel like Judgment Day." He stood up, picking up the small gift bags I'd prepared for each of the kids, each one adorned with a note I'd handwritten myself. James's was a collection of old movie tickets, Amy's was a deep green scarf I'd knitted from wool, and Ethan's was a limited edition jazz vinyl. "You're too kind," Walter murmured. "They won't turn down a mother who's this gentle and dignified." "But they might reject a widow who remarried," I mumbled, my voice nearly swallowed by the couch. He paused for a few seconds, then gently placed the gifts back on the table, helping me to my feet. "Let them reject us, Maggie. Tomorrow we'll walk into their home not to beg for their acceptance, but to proudly show them our happiness." I nodded. The sea breeze outside suddenly turned gentle, like an old blanket, quietly wrapping around my shoulders. I knew tomorrow I would tell myself, "I've followed the rules long enough. It's time to make decisions for myself." By the time we arrived at James's house, Christmas carols were already playing in the living room. Their decorations were always well thought out. The star at the top of the tree, encrusted with red jewels, was something I had given them over a decade ago, back when James and his now estranged wife had just moved into this 3-story house. That star still sat on top, but no one ever mentioned where it had come from. Walter and I stood at the door and rang the bell. He gave my hand a reassuring squeeze, small but enough to settle my nerves. Amy opened the door. She was wearing a bright red sweater, and her smile faltered for a brief second when she saw Walter. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice flat. She glanced at Walter. "You are?" I was about to speak when James's voice called from inside. "Is that you, Mom?" He walked out dressed in a sharp suit, a white shirt crisply pressed. He looked like he was ready for a client meeting, not a casual family gathering. He stood at the door, looked at Walter, and his expression was devoid of surprise, more of a cold, assessing gaze. "Come on in," he said, his tone indifferent. As we stepped inside, Ethan popped his head out from the kitchen, a chunk of cheese still in his mouth. He stopped when he saw Walter, frowned, and didn't say a word. I cleared my throat and said, "Kids, I'd like to take this opportunity at our Christmas gathering to introduce someone very important to me." "Important?" James asked immediately, his voice devoid of hesitation. I nodded and motioned to Walter. "I'm Walter Hayes," he smiled. "It's a pleasure to meet your family." Ethan set the cheese down, leaned against the kitchen doorframe, and gave us an impatient look. Amy smiled politely but lowered her gaze, clearly not wanting to engage. James sank into the sofa with a deep sigh. "Mom, do you realize how old you are?" he said without even looking at me. I was stunned, but before I could respond he added, "You want to spend your later years with a stranger? You really think we're going to support you in this?" "James, please." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Walter is not a stranger. We've known each other for a year. I want you to meet him, to understand." "Understand?" Amy suddenly scoffed. "If we all acted like you, dating at over 60, what would people think of us?" Ethan interrupted. "Do you think you're still 30? Let me tell you the truth, Mom, nobody is going to want to clean up your mess. If you end up with health issues or money problems, are we supposed to step in again?" I stood frozen, feeling like my feet were nailed to the floor. "I'm not asking you to step in. I just want to share my life with you, my joy, the happiness I've found with someone I respect and care about." I controlled my emotions as best I could. James stood up, took a step closer, and his voice became sharper. "So you're planning on transferring your house, your retirement, even the deeds to our family home into his name?" "I never said that." I stared at him, incredulous. They didn't know that Walter, a retired history professor, was financially more secure than I was. "But you've thought about it, haven't you?" he pressed. "Everything you've worked for all these years, isn't it all for this family?" I suddenly felt my throat tighten but forced myself to speak calmly. "Everything I've done was out of my own will, but that doesn't mean you get to decide how I live the rest of my life." "Fine, do whatever you want." Amy crossed her arms. "But don't expect us to support you. And don't try to use family to guilt us." Ethan sneered. "I really don't get it. Why bring an old man here as your Christmas guest, expecting us to pretend to welcome him? You're just shameless." The room fell silent. The only sound was Silent Night, still playing softly from the speakers. Walter gently tugged at my arm, his voice soft. "Let's go." But just as we turned to leave, James threw out one last blow that shattered any remaining hope. "Don't come back. Remember, this house doesn't welcome a foolish, love-stricken mother. You'll ruin our family's reputation." I stopped in my tracks and turned to face him, staring at him for several seconds. His face was serious, without a hint of regret. "So that's how it is," I whispered, my voice hoarse. I picked up the gift bags I had prepared for them, but hesitated before gently setting them back on the table. "Have a Merry Christmas." I turned to look at them. "I truly wish you peace and happiness." I took Walter's hand and we walked out of the house, the one I had once carefully decorated for Christmas. The door slammed behind us and the wind had picked up, making the porch lights flicker. Walter pulled me into an embrace. "Are you okay?" I didn't say anything. I just nodded. I wasn't sure whether I was trembling with anger or coldness. In that moment I realized one thing. After 20 years of raising 3 children, I had never taught them how to respect me. By the time we got home it was completely dark outside. Walter insisted on driving me home, saying it might be too hard for me to be alone. I had been stubborn, telling him I was fine, but the moment I inserted the key into the lock, my hand couldn't help but tremble. The living room was pitch black. I didn't turn on the lights. I simply took off my coat and hung it on the hook by the door, then sat down on the sofa, staring at the blank wall. Walter sat beside me, silent, not rushing to say anything. He always knew when to remain quiet. The words from my children still echoed in my mind. "You're shameless. Don't expect us to support you. You're ruining the family name." Each of these words felt like a small knife, none fatal but all piercing deep into my bones. I always thought, though our relationship wasn't perfect, my bond with my children was solid. I had done so much for them. When James was a child and often got sick, I stayed up all night by his side. When Amy almost ran out of money for rent in college, I scraped together money to pay it. Ethan still uses the secondary card I gave him to pay off credit bills, and not once has he said, "Thank you." No. Just because I started a late-life romance, they treated me like I had committed an unforgivable crime. They wouldn't even listen to a word of explanation. I wiped my face trying to calm myself, but the tears kept falling. Walter reached out and pulled me into his arms. I leaned against his shoulder without saying a word. He didn't speak either, just gently patted my back, slow and steady. After a while I sniffed, forcing a smile. "Am I silly? Before I mentioned you to them, I even baked gingerbread, wrote cards, thinking I could give them a warm surprise." Walter shook his head. "No, Maggie. It's not foolish. It is too good. You've always thought about others." "But what about them?" I said softly. "They've never asked how many years I've spent alone." He didn't respond. He just looked at me. I knew he understood, but I also knew that he couldn't bear this heartbreak for me. The next day I was in the garden trimming the rose bushes. Even though it was winter, a few plants still had soft pink flowers blooming. The sunlight fell across the grass and the yard was quiet, only the sound of the shears clipping branches and the occasional bird call in the distance. My phone vibrated with a new notification from social media. I picked it up and saw a photo Amy had posted. Her, James and Ethan standing in front of the Christmas tree, surrounded by their kids. Caption read, "May every family be safe and happy." I scrolled down to the comments. One neighbor had written, "Where's Maggie?" Amy replied, "We've cut ties with her. We don't want to be disturbed. Please understand." I froze. The scissors were still in my hand, the blade pressed lightly against a rose stem, but I didn't cut it. In that moment I wasn't sad. I was completely awake. Not only had they refused to accept Walter, but they had also decided I was the one to be pruned, like a useless weed. Just then my phone rang. It was Vivian. "Did you see it?" she asked as soon as I picked up, her tone clearly upset. "I saw," I said softly. "This is too much," she paused. "Do you know why they're doing this? It's not because you did something wrong, but because they're afraid of losing control. You've always been their support and they've taken your sacrifices for granted. Now that you're not living by their rules, they're starting to panic." I didn't say anything, just listened quietly. She continued, "Maggie, you need to ask yourself, how long are you going to keep trying to please them? You've sacrificed half your life for them. Isn't it time to live for yourself?" I paused for a few seconds, then whispered, "You're right. All this time I've put all my time and energy into being a good mother, but I never asked myself, am I a happy woman?" On the other end of the line, Vivian's voice softened. "You're finally awake. It's not too late." After hanging up, I placed the trimmed roses into an old glass jar and set it in the center of the dining table. When Walter came in and saw me, he asked gently, "How are you today?" "Better than yesterday." I paused. "Walter, I want to change some things." He sat down and looked at me seriously. "I don't want to live for anyone anymore, and I don't want to keep forcing harmony just to please others. I want to start with myself, take the first step." "How do you want to do that?" he asked. I stood up, walked to the study, opened the drawer, and pulled out the account and property documents that hadn't been touched in years. "I want them to know I'm not their default ATM, nor am I a mother they can toss aside whenever they please." He nodded, his gaze soft but firm. "I'll always be by your side." In that moment, I knew my true home was no longer in that 3-story house, but in a place where someone respects you, supports you, and is willing to stand by your side. I had been kicked out of their home, but from now on I was going to welcome myself back into my true life. I spent the entire afternoon organizing all the financial transactions between me and my children, one by one. I had never done something like this before. Over the past 20 years, Every time they asked for help, I automatically said yes. Whether it was James's failed investments, Amy's overdue rent, or Ethan's maxed out credit card, I'd always thought, they're my children, I can't just ignore them. But now I finally understood some of that helping wasn't out of love. It was out of a guilt-driven habit. That habitual self-sacrifice was an invisible shackle. I thought it was family love, but in truth, it was self-exploitation. I dialed my bank account manager's number and my voice was calmer than I had expected. Hello, this is Margaret Delaney. I need to cancel a few authorized secondary cards. Which cardholders? I spoke Ethan's name clearly, one word at a time. There was a brief pause on the other end and then they replied, understood. The card will be frozen within 24 hours, and it will be deactivated in the system thereafter. I nodded. Also, I need to set up individual bill alerts, with all major transfers requiring my approval first. When I hung up, I didn't feel any hesitation, only a long-forgotten sense of relief. The next day I contacted our financial advisor. Yes, the house, the one I had worked hard for, scrimping and saving after Frank passed away over the span of decades, was still considered by my children as reserved property. Amy had even privately said to me, Mom, if you ever pass, that house will be mine. It'll be perfect for me and the kids. At the time I didn't respond, just smiled. Now I picked up the phone and said, I'm planning to sell the house. He double-checked the address and after a brief hesitation asked, the one in East Haven? Yes, that one. I'll clear it out before spring. You can start preparing to list it now. I could hear the shock on his side, but he quickly replied, no problem. I'll prepare the materials. After that, I sent Amy a brief message. The house will be listed for sale next year. You'll need to start finding alternative housing. I'll give you plenty of time to adjust, but don't hold any illusions. It took less than 5 minutes for the phone to ring. It was, of course, her. Mom, what is this about? Her voice was already tinged with emotion. You promised you'd leave the house to me and Emma. I never said for sure, Amy. I only said we'll talk about it later. Is this because of him? Did he convince you to do this? No one convinced me. This was my decision, I replied calmly. She was silent for a few seconds before her voice began to shake. You're crazy, Mom. You've given us your whole life and now for some outsider you're pushing us all away. He's not an outsider. I interrupted her. Walter respects me more than any of you. He's never ridiculed me for my age, my status, or my past choices. And you, just because I'm starting a new chapter in my life, you shame me, abandon me. She tried to say something more, but I didn't give her the chance. I've made myself clear. What you decide to do next is up to you. I won't consider, arrange, or bear your burdens for you anymore. I hung up and placed the phone on the dining table, taking a deep breath. Then I looked at Walter. He stood in the kitchen doorway, his eyes filled with a gentle pride. You know. I walked over to him, leaning against him. I've never been so sure that I'm not their tool, nor am I just their emergency wallet. He kissed my forehead lightly and said, This is the woman I know. In the following days I canceled all the secondary credit cards and cleared out all the automatic transfer setups from my account. Amy's tutoring fees, Ethan's gym membership, James's emergency backup card that was never paid back. Let them figure it out themselves. Then I started organizing my own life. I bought perennial plants from the garden center, ones I hadn't dared to get for years. I booked a small trip for Walter and me, not a family visit or helping the kids, but simply, we want to go. I took down the family memory frame that had hung for 20 years and replaced it with a picture of Walter and me in front of a used bookstore, on a day when the sun was warm, and the way he held my hand seemed to say, I'm always here. None of these things were written in the Bible, family rules, or recommended in any motherhood guide. But each step made me feel closer to living for myself. They never imagined I would truly walk out of the house that had confined me, no longer serving them tea, no longer covering for them. They also never imagined I would one day stand on my own side. This wasn't rebellion, it was a choice. I'm not a rebellious mother, I just finally understood. No matter how old a woman gets, she can refuse to be consumed and choose to be cherished. The house I had originally planned to leave to Amy in East Haven, about a 20-minute drive from where I now lived, had always been a source of contention in my mind. At first I had intended to leave it to her and Emma. The house was near the community hospital where Amy worked. The location was convenient, and the front yard had an oak tree I had planted many years ago. But now, the swing under that tree had rusted, and Amy had never taken the initiative to care for the house. That evening, Amy and Ethan showed up at my door one after the other. No call, no hesitation at the door, just the smell of conflict as soon as they walked in. "Are you really going to sell the house?" Amy stood in the middle of the living room, her expression tight. "You didn't even discuss it with me?" Ethan leaned against the doorframe, his hands in his pockets, looking like he was just there to cheer her on. "I don't need to discuss it," I said calmly from my seat at the dining table. "It's my house." "But you've already hinted that it's mine," Amy raised her voice. "I'm raising Emma alone. You know how hard it is to rent. You're just selling it off. Did that old man convince you to do this?" "Walter didn't influence any of my decisions," I interrupted her. "I just realized that my past hints to you were actually feeding into your expectations. I don't want to keep doing that anymore." Ethan chimed in. "So you're going to rely on Walter for your retirement? Do you even know how much he has? Aren't you worried you'll get scammed?" I looked at him, my voice cold. "Ethan, I still remember your credit card bills every month. You use my secondary card, and yet you question how I spend my own money." His face stiffened, but he didn't respond. I stood up, pulled several documents from the drawer and placed them in front of them. "These are copies of the bank statements I just pulled. You can see for yourselves how much I've transferred to you, how many bills I've paid, and how many insurance policies I've bought for you in the past 5 years. Amy looked down, flipping through the pages, her expression darkening with each turn. "You're not kids anymore. Ethan, you're in your 30s. Amy, you're a mother yourself. What I've done for you wasn't an obligation, it was out of love. But love isn't a given." I watched them, both silent, not daring to argue. "I'm canceling all the secondary cards. Starting next month, I won't be paying your bills, your insurance, or your tuition. Not a single penny." Amy slammed her hand on the table, unable to contain her anger. "Are you out of your mind? You're giving your whole life to some outsider. And who else do you think would be willing to take care of you?" Ethan shouted back, almost mocking. "When he gets sick and leaves you, you'll regret it." The last shred of warmth in my heart shattered. I slowly stood up and looked at them. "Did you ever think about the 20 years of loneliness I've spent living alone? Did you ever wonder who stood by my side when I needed companionship?" They were about to say something more, but Walter's voice suddenly came from the hallway. "I'm here." He was wearing a gray wool cardigan, his tone not loud, but clear enough to cut through the tension. "I haven't spent a single penny of hers," he said. "In fact, I opened a new medical fund account for her, joint account. It was my idea." He looked at Amy. "Did you know? I was planning on giving Emma an education trust as a welcome gift, as a gesture of my desire to be part of this family. But it seems I'm not welcome." Amy's expression shifted and she was about to come up with a response, but Walter didn't wait for her. "It doesn't matter if you don't welcome me," he said, his voice firm. "But you will not disrespect her. That I cannot accept." He turned and walked back into the kitchen. I looked at Amy and Ethan, not saying another word, just pointing to the door. "You should leave." "Mom, can't you reconsider?" Amy's voice softened slightly, like she was trying to salvage something. I interrupted her. "Don't say anything. I'm very clear now. What you care about has never been me as a person but what I can provide." They stood there motionless. I took a deep breath, walked over and opened the door for them. "I won't kick you out of my life, but I will not let you control my life anymore." They finally left, and when the door slammed shut behind them, I sat down in the chair, unmoving. Walter came over, placing a cup in front of me. It was my favorite lemon tea, the steam gently rising from the cup. "This time you've truly let go," he said. I nodded. "I don't owe them anymore. I've paid my dues," I whispered. "I don't know if every woman at 66 has the chance to start anew. But now I know that I do." Walter and I went to Monterey, staying in a small hotel close to the beach. At night, I could hear the sound of the tide washing over the sand. The first night, I hardly slept, not because I couldn't, but because it had been so long since I'd had the kind of peace that comes without the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. The next morning we took a walk along the beach. The sky wasn't fully light yet, and the air was salty with a hint of pine. I carried my shoes in my hand, my feet sinking into the sand with every step, each one feeling like I was walking into another world. Walter looked at me and smiled, saying I looked like a student finally released from school. We had breakfast at a small cafe by the beach. He ordered banana pancakes and I ordered salmon toast. The sunlight streamed through the window and I looked down at my plate, suddenly feeling like I might laugh. "What's so funny?" he asked. "I just realized I haven't ordered a breakfast I like in so long," I said. Every time I went out to eat before, I'd always order the cheapest thing. I'd think, I need to save money, the kids need their insurance paid next week. Or, Emma's birthday is coming up, I need to buy a gift. Walter set his fork down and looked at me. "So, what are you going to order now?" "I'm going to order what I like regardless of the price," I joked. After that breakfast, I finished an entire book on the hotel balcony for the first time, without interruptions, without checking my phone, without anyone calling me mom, or asking me to do anything. I was just myself. A woman who loves gardening, literature, old movies, and walking along the beach. When we got back home, Walter and I went to the cultural center where his daughter worked. Her name was Carla. She was a social program coordinator, as gentle and smart as her father, with a strong work ethic. She warmly welcomed me and invited me to join a mature women's roundtable project they were organizing for the community. At first I hesitated, but I agreed. At the first meeting, there were 7 women in the room. Retired teachers, single nurses, a former musician who had recently lost her husband. They took turns sharing the bravest decisions they had made over the past 5 years. When it was my turn, I took a deep breath and said, "I told my children at Christmas that I was in a relationship. They were upset and kicked me out of their home. But I didn't back down. I decided to live my life." The room fell silent and then applause broke out. In that moment, I realized something. We women had all been taught the same thing. Be a good mother, a good wife, a good mother-in-law. Don't be a burden to others, don't disappoint anyone. But no one had ever told us how not to betray ourselves. Over the next few months, I started helping Carla organize the Mature Women's Salon at the Cultural Center. Every 2 weeks we held small gatherings discussing topics like the shame of second marriages, women's financial independence, how to reject emotional manipulation, and children are not the only meaning of your life. These were topics no one had ever spoken to us about. But now we spoke about them, and we spoke more clearly than anyone. That spring, I was invited to be interviewed by a local podcast station on the theme of awakening and reinvention for older women. The host asked, "When do you think your change began?" I said, "It started the day I stood in my son's living room, being humiliated by them." I didn't shout back or cry. I just took my partner's hand and walked out of that house that no longer welcomed me. He nodded and asked, "Do you regret it?" I smiled and said, "The only regret I have is that I didn't do it sooner." After the episode aired, countless listeners left comments on social media saying, "This is the woman I want to become." And I thought, yes, this is who I've always been. Relationships between people often come down to one word: need. The moment I stopped being needed, my phone went quiet for over 2 months. Amy stopped sending her usual, "Mom, can you cover the utility bill for me?" Ethan's credit card bill notifications stopped popping up, and James didn't even send the usual, "Emma has a competition this weekend, are you coming?" I thought they had truly made up their minds to cut me off. But later I realized they simply hadn't been pushed that far yet. When life becomes difficult, people always seem to remember their mother. That afternoon, I had just finished a salon meeting and was helping Carla clear the tables when my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost hung up, but for some reason I answered. "Mom, it's me." It was James. I didn't say anything, just waited for him to continue. "Can we talk? Is now a good time?" His voice lacked the usual certainty, no longer the tone of "I'm telling you," but more like, "I'm asking you." I hesitated for a moment, then agreed, "Sure. Where are you?" "I'm outside your house." I froze for a moment, and for a brief second I thought about hanging up. But I ended up going back. He was sitting on the porch steps, his suit disheveled, holding a paper bag, looking tired. When he looked up and saw me, he even gave a sheepish smile. "I bought you that orange peel tea you used to love," he said, holding up the bag. "I remember you used to make a cup every morning." I didn't take the tea, nor did I respond to his, "I remember." "What's going on?" I asked, walking past him and into the house. He followed without me inviting him. He stood by the kitchen door, not sitting down. "I want to apologize," he said. "The last time we spoke, what I said was really harsh. I know you were angry. I wasn't angry, I interrupted. I was hurt. He nodded, avoiding my gaze. How's the divorce with Mary going? I changed the subject. He looked up as if I'd pricked him. How did you know? I didn't know. But I could guess. He smiled bitterly. I lost the case. Mary got the house and half of the money in our account. I'm renting a place for now and the company is laying off people. My project got cut. I didn't speak, just watched him. You know what I regret the most? His voice dropped. It's not the divorce, not the money. It's that I thought you having a relationship was something to be ashamed of. Something in me stirred, but I didn't show it. I cared too much about how others saw me, too much about what my mother was supposed to be like. But I never asked you what you wanted. He paused. I'm not a good son. I was silent for a while before softly replying, I don't want to talk about good or bad anymore. Those were the standards when you were a child. You're an adult now and you need to take responsibility for the choices you make. He nodded. I know. So, are you here today because you want me to forgive you or because you want me to help you? He gave a wry smile. Both, I guess. I looked at him for a few seconds, my voice soft but clear. You're here because you regret it, not because you truly understand. You need help, but that doesn't mean you deserve me to sacrifice again. He understood but didn't speak immediately. You came here with a paper bag of tea, thinking I'd forget how you insulted me that day. My tone didn't waver. I haven't forgotten how you humiliated me in front of Walter, how you called me love-struck. His face hardened and he said nothing. I'm not heartless, I leaned against the counter. I'm also a mother who deserves respect. You've only ever thought of me when you needed me, but when I needed you to stand by me, you were the first to step away. The room fell silent. Then he spoke quietly, I'm willing to move back home and take care of you. I paused, looking at him, then asked slowly, are you doing it because you want to take care of me or because you have nowhere else to go? He didn't answer, but his eyes betrayed him. I nodded, then you don't need to. He stood still as if he wanted to say something more, but in the end said nothing. When he left, he didn't look back. That night, I made myself a cup of the orange peel tea. I didn't cry anymore because I finally understood. Family is not a debt and forgiveness is not an obligation. A few days after James, Amy showed up. No phone call, no text message, she just showed up at my door with Emma in tow, carrying a shabby storage box. Emma was wrapped in a blanket too thin for the cold, her face red from the chill. My first instinct was to feel sorry for her. But that wave of sympathy rose only to be pushed back down by memories. Amy spoke first. Mom, I just need to stay for a few days until I find a new place. I looked at her. How did you suddenly end up moving out? She avoided my gaze. The landlord suddenly decided to raise the rent when signing a new contract. I nodded. You know the house is on the market, right? The one in East Haven. You once said that was going to be your and Emma's future home. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. I know. I paused, then looked down at her. You're still hoping to move back in, aren't you? She bit her lip. Do you have to phrase it like that? I'm just asking, I said, opening the door a little wider. Come in, Emma's freezing. She stepped inside, sat on the sofa, and Emma crawled onto my lap, softly calling me Grandma. I stroked her hair, not saying anything. Amy spoke tentatively. Mom, I'm willing to take care of you, whether you're sick or not, I'll be here for you. I looked into her eyes, then slowly asked, You're only saying this because the house hasn't sold yet, right? You think there's still a chance? She hesitated, her eyes drifting away. I'm not here to mooch off you, she quickly added. Emma's so small and I have nowhere to go. I sighed, gently settling Emma in my arms, then turned to face her. Amy, that day at James's house, you stood across from me looking at me like I was a child who had misbehaved. You told me I was shameless. Do you remember? She lowered her head. I was too harsh that day. I softly said, It wasn't too harsh. You really didn't want to see me happy. She suddenly looked up, her voice trembling. I'm not jealous of you. I'm just scared that when you get old no one will take care of you, scared you'll be tricked, scared you'll be alone. But you said you're giving the house to someone else and Emma won't even have a room to stay in. I nodded. You're not scared of me being lonely. You're scared of losing your backup, the safety net you've always had. She bit her lip and didn't respond. I continued, I don't want to involve Emma. She's innocent. But you need to understand, we're no longer in that time where you can just say, Mom, I'm struggling, and I'll cover for you. She burst into tears. I really don't know where else to go. I paused for a moment, then said, I'm only going to say this once. I'm not your enemy, but I'm no longer your unconditional provider. I won't forgive everything just because of what you said before. She looked at me shocked. I gently handed Emma back to her. You can stay tonight. Tomorrow I can take you to the temporary shelter. I know about the women's assistance program there. Amy jumped to her feet. Are you really that heartless? I looked at her, my tone calm. Heartless? You told people on Christmas Day that you cut ties with your mother, and now you're calling me heartless. She couldn't say a word, standing at the door holding Emma. I didn't say anything else, just opened the door for her. Just as she stepped out, before I could close the door, Ethan showed up, his jacket zipper broken, carrying a duffel bag, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen him. I've got nowhere to stay, he said as soon as he walked in, hands raised in a gesture of defeat. What, are you planning to let me die on the street? Ethan. I leaned against the door frame. You're 31, you have hands and feet, a college degree, and you couldn't find a job in the last 3 years because you refused to take low-status positions. And now you're blaming me. He blinked, still wearing that I deserve this look. I know I've had a bad temper, but I'm your son, he said. You can't just stand by and watch me fall apart. I looked at him silently for a while before speaking. You guys called me love-struck, said I was a disgrace, said I ruined the family name. You kicked me out that day. Now you've got nowhere to stay, no money, no one to care for you, and you want to come back and be my children again. I sighed. It doesn't work like that. They stood at the door, Amy crying as she said, Mom, we were wrong, please give us another chance. I shook my head, speaking softly. Now that you regret it, it doesn't undo the things you said to me. Their cries mixed together and the neighbors downstairs peeked out. I didn't say anything more, just dialed the community security number. Hi, it's me, Maggie from House 3. A few people are gathering outside my door. Can you send someone over? Less than 10 minutes later, 2 security patrols showed up. I locked the door and only spoke through the crack. They told me to leave before. Now please make them leave. After the storm, I thought I would go through a tough, lingering low point. But I didn't. What truly weighed me down wasn't they're gone. It was realizing that for all those years, I had always believed that beyond being a mother, I had no other identity. Now that I had finally shed that role, I thought I would feel empty, but instead, it was as if I had removed a leaden coat that had been pressing down on my shoulders. When spring came, the first clematis bloom appeared on the balcony. Walter took a picture of it and shared it in our small community salon group, with a caption that made me laugh out loud. One of the most loyal companions in retirement. Doesn't scold you, doesn't ask for money, and blooms every day to deliver fragrance. In mid-April, I hosted a small birthday party. I didn't notify the kids or make it a big affair. I just invited Walter, Carla, and a few friends I'd met at the salon. We set up a few wooden tables in the garden of the Community Cultural Center, with wildflowers arranged in glass vases. The air smelled like freshly mowed grass, the scent of spring. Walter played me one of my favorite piano pieces from my youth, Claire de Lune. As the melody started, time seemed to slow for a beat. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and listened to the music flowing in the gentle breeze. It felt as if the music was pulling a slow, graceful arc to release all the uncried frustrations, struggles, and rebirths of the past year. Someone recorded that performance, and they also casually captured moments of Walter, me, and our friends chatting. Later, that video was shared on social media. It didn't take long for it to spread. Most of the comments were from strangers, but they said things that warmed my heart. She's the real leading lady. I'm sending this video to my mom. She needs to hear this story. I'm 67 and just moved out of the apartment I shared with my daughter. She never respected me. I'm now living in a room at a friend's inn, and each day I feel happier than the last. I didn't go back to read the comments, but Carla would send me a few every day. She always said, "Look, your awakening isn't just helping you." Later, I quietly transferred some money to Amy. Not much. Enough to make a difference, but not enough to completely change anything. It was enough for her to move Emma into a clean, safe apartment, cover a few months' rent, and prepay some tuition fees. I didn't leave a note, nor did I include a card. I wasn't trying to fix anything, and I wouldn't allow her to just waltz back into my life. But Emma was innocent, and she shouldn't have to pay the price for someone else's arrogance. What I could give wasn't habitual sacrifice. It was simply the basic kindness that one adult can offer another. I just wanted to quietly support her so she wouldn't be easily crushed by the world. That night I had a dream. In it, Emma was painting a picture of me. She said, "Grandma, when you smile, it's like spring has opened the door." I thought perhaps this is the image I want to leave behind. Not one of resentment, not one of people-pleasing, but one that comes like spring, clear, bright, and without apology. I never imagined that a door sign could make me hesitate for so long. That morning, Walter pulled out a piece of oak from the garage and said he wanted to replace our door sign. He told me that if I was willing, he'd like to add his name to it. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked into the kitchen and brewed 2 cups of coffee. The sunlight outside was perfect, spilling over the stone path in the backyard, casting a patchwork of shadows. I stared at the dappled light for a long time, but my mind wandered to a much earlier time. For the past 20 years, I had always lived under someone else's name. After Frank passed away, I became Mrs. Delaney, James and Amy's mother, Emma's grandmother, and the widow Maggie everyone knew in the neighborhood. There was no place that truly belonged to me. It wasn't until this year that I finally realized I wasn't an extension of someone else, I wasn't someone else's responsibility, and I wasn't a monument to a past memory. I am me. I walked out of the kitchen and handed Walter his coffee. He said, "If you're willing, we can put Walter and Maggie Hayes on it." I gently shook my head. "Just Maggie M. will do." He looked a bit surprised but didn't ask why. I knew why. That M wasn't the abbreviation for Delaney anymore, nor did it need to be followed by a man's last name. That M was the first letter of my own name. It was Maggie, just Maggie. A few days later, I received a letter from Amy. It was a real letter, handwritten, not a text or email. Her handwriting was shaky and the ink had bled a little on the paper. I could tell she had written it absent-mindedly, perhaps after crying. There were no pleasantries, just a few heartfelt apologies. "Mom, I don't know how to make it right, but I truly regret what I said. I remember everything you've done for me from when I was little until now. I just pretended not to. When you said, you came because you need me, not because you truly understand, I heard it. I really heard it. Emma has always missed you. Maybe after summer, you'll be willing to give me another chance and let her visit you. Thank you for still helping me in the end. I won't take anything from you again." I finished reading the letter, but I didn't cry or laugh. I simply tucked it into an old photo album, the one I had treasured for so long but had long since been stored away. I placed it between the photos from James's college graduation and the page with pictures of Ethan learning to ride a bike. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't forgive her, but because I finally understood that some relationships don't need to be revisited. They just need to be seen for what they are, then let go. A few days later, Walter and I went to the town's spring market. I brought a few pots of herbs I had grown and made a small sign that read, "Granny Maggie's Garden." Many people stopped to ask if I was selling something. I told them no, that I just wanted to give them to anyone willing to care for them. A young girl took a pot of thyme and said, "You have such a warm smile, like my grandma." I smiled back. "Then your grandma must be someone who loves to garden too."